Hello, children. Today I am going to do one of the most beautiful poems in English literature for you. A Thing of Beauty is a Joy Forever by John Keats. It's my favorite poem, and I think one can look at it from a very basic point of view to an extremely philosophical point of view. Before we do the poem, I'd like to say a few things. That a thing of beauty that we see in life is something which remains with us. Talking about John Keats is perhaps one of the finest poets in English literature. And it is said that John Keats followed the tradition of the Romantics of the 18th century. The 18th century poets, as we know, were poets who broke away from the traditions of the classical poets, and they believed in writing poetry which was, as they defined, was a spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings. The title, focusing on the title before we do anything, A Thing of Beauty is a Joy Forever, is almost like we are in a few words putting the entire philosophy of Romanticism. William Wordsworth speaks in his poem Daffodils and says that how he once glanced over a host of golden daffodils besides the lake, beneath the trees, fluttering and dancing in the breeze. And then he concludes the poem by saying that I gazed and gazed, but little thought what joy the sight to me had brought, for often on my couch I lie, in wake and torrent pensive mood, the flash upon the inward eye, which is the bliss of solitude, and then my heart with pleasure fills and dances with the daffodils. So these words talk about the philosophy of Romanticism, and John Keats was one of the most loved and still one of the most loved poets of Romantic period, whereby he talked about poetry as nothing but emotions recapitulated in tranquility. He talks about how you see something beautiful, and something beautiful that you see in life is something which will keep coming back to you. It never fades into something. It is something which goes on becoming more and more beautiful in the most dire times of your life, in the times of stress and strains in your life. It is these things of beauty that make your life worth living. Before we get into a detailed analysis of the poem, I would like to say a few things about John Keats and the poem itself. A Thing of Beauty is a Joy Forever by John Keats was a poem written by Keats, and it was a hugely ambitious poet. Talking about John Keats, one must remember that a lot of critics feel that it is unfortunate that John Keats died at a very, very tender age. And if John Keats had survived, he actually died at an age of 26. And they say that when he was good, he was brilliant as in relation to his oaths. And when he wrote not so well, he could very often be termed as quite pathetic. John Keats died at 26. But a lot of people feel that if Keats has survived to live a full life, it is quite sure that the crown of English literature would have rested on the head of this brilliant poet. John Keats, we know from a lot of reading around and references that initially he took to the medical profession, but some way he realized that there was a poet in him, and eventually he realized that it was this poetry which was him more than any other profession. So we see in this light John Keats as a poet of the nature, as one of the most well read and most oft quoted poets of the Romantic period. And John Keats realized that the poetry writing was something he was really passionate about. In fact, he took up to writing this poetry, A Thing of Beauty is a Joy Forever, is an excerpt from a very, very long poem of his, a poem called Endymion, a poem about 4,000 lines long, and most of it was quite unreadable. But some parts showed the sparkling genius of John Keats. And this chapter in your book, A Thing of Beauty, this excerpt is one such part which showed truly how brilliant and gifted and what a truly angelic, not only looking, but angelic writer John Keats was. So let us look at the prelude in the poem, wherein it's written that John Keats was born in 1795 and he lived till 1821. He is considered to be one of the landmarks of the Romantic period. His odes are surpassable, and if untimely death had not snatched him from life, the crown of English literature would have definitely been placed on his head. This excerpt, which marks the beginning of Keats' longer poem, Endymion, voices his eternal love for beauty. He says in the ode to the Christian urn that beauty is truth, and truth, beauty, that's all I know on earth, and that's all I need to know. So Keats termed his poem as a feverish attempt and said that he wanted to create a little region in which lovers of poetry could wander. As a young student of literature, I remember reading a lovely long elegy, 55 stanzas long elegy written by Shelley on the death of John Keats. And the name of the poem was Adonais, in which Shelley actually compares Keats to Adonis, the god of beauty, and said what a huge loss it was to the world of English literature. The early sad demise of Adonais, that is Keats. Keats and Shelley were close friends. In fact, towards the last years of his life, when Keats developed the disease of, he actually got TB. And very often people say that tuberculosis, as we call it, is a poet's disease. It's the people who are very, very sensitive who get this disease, and we realize that how badly and adversely Keats was affected by the lethal attacks of the critics after his experiment with this 4,000 long lines poem Endymion, and how critics criticized this so much that he really took ill and he eventually moved to Rome. And it is there that there is still a little room there which is termed and treated as a museum in Rome. Children, if you do happen to go to Rome, Italy, the hot spot of Corona these days, so if you do happen to go to Rome, do walk up the Spanish stairs, and that's the room where Shelley and Keats spent their last few years together. And it's on the death of John Keats that Shelley actually wrote this long elegy, 55 stanzas long, brilliant elegy, very beautiful. And Shelley himself was a great romantic poet. What is really strange and ironical that in the poem Adonais, Shelley actually talks about Adonais, that he means is referring to Keats, that he has death in water. This whole poem talks about the nymphs and the kind of elegy, the weeping and the grief underwater for Adonais. And it is Actually, extremely amazing, strange, and ironical that it was actually Shelley who eventually had a death by drowning. And so we can say his poem written, his elegy, which was written on the death of Keats, was actually a premonition for his own death. This 4,000 lines long poem he called the Great Rhyme of Invention. It is said that it received bitter attacks by his critics. Many feel it caused him severe depression and hastened his death. And his dear friend Shelley, with whom he shared his last days in a house close to the Spanish stairs in Rome, paid a tribute to him on his death by writing a 55 stanza long elegy, Adonais. This is regarded as one of the finest elegies ever. John Keats now lives peacefully in a beautiful graveyard in Rome. Now, talking about a thing of beauty is a joy forever, we realize that it can be very well termed as an allegorical poem. It is a poem based on the myth of a shepherd named Endymion. And the myth goes that Cynthia, the moon goddess, actually once descended and saw this handsome shepherd Endymion sleeping. And the shepherd, with his interaction of goddess, fell madly in love with Cynthia. And then the book goes on as to how he pursues. The poem is allegorical to an extent that it talks about basically the theme. The theme is about, it talks about how human soul, a man's soul, is in perennial search of perfection, of the perfect beauty, and that he finds ways and methods of reaching this. And this poem, of course, by itself talks about the beautiful things which make your life worth living in a world which has lost its glory, has lost its beauty, has lost the good, noble souls. And there is nothing in this life for us to go on living. It's not like the past world where the gods interacted with the human beings and there were nice people and there were people one could look up to. People had integrity, people had values. But today we see most of the human beings are manipulative, calculative, and life is itself full of so much stress and strain that it is not worth living. So in this light, we can visualize the death of Adonais and how all the angels and the entire universe actually cried when Adonais died. And of course, this is symbolic of the death of John Keats, the legendary poet, to which Shelley mentioned that Keats' dying was as Adonais had died. So now we come to the actual text, and I'm going to read it stanza by stanza, students, for your benefit. And then we will go on with little discussion. We will try and see what exactly does the poet mean. I've already mentioned to you that we have to look at the poem from the point of view of a poet who was a romantic poet, and the basic philosophy of romanticism was that it redefined poetry. So it redefined poetry as emotions, as sentiments recollected in tranquility. They talked about simpler things, never before the romantic that the poet talks about, like a solitary reaper, or daffodils, or a nightingale. These were the things they spoke of, the things which stayed in people's mind. And in retrospect, when people thought about them as beautiful things, it gave a smile on their face. It gave them a purpose to go on. It gave them energy to go on from a life which is totally meaningless. These things of beauty brought some form of beauty in their otherwise totally parched, totally de energized, totally, what should I say, disappointed, and totally hopeless existence. So now, coming to the text, let me read the first stanza. Please stay with me. A thing of beauty is a joy forever. Its loveliness increases. It will never pass into nothingness, but will keep a bower quiet for us, and a sleep full of sweet dreams and health in quiet breathing. So, the poet begins the poem by saying that a thing of beauty is a joy forever. Anything beautiful that you have seen, it doesn't necessarily mean some beauty in nature. It could be a beautiful book that you have read. It could have been a beautiful gesture of a friend. It could have been a touching sight that you saw, maybe a mother cuddling a child. And it could have been just in the slums, a group of children smiling despite the poverty. So these are the things of beauty. It could be a beautiful flower. It could be the glorious sun. It could be the unending ocean. A thing of beauty is a joy forever. It's not something you see once and you will ever forgive and forget. It's not something that you will forget. It will stay in your mind forever. A thing of beauty will stay in your mind forever. It's captured in your mind's camera. At any given point of time, you have the power and you have the strength to recapitulate that moment and to relive that moment and bring a freshness and happiness and a kind of purpose to your life once more. So, the subsequent lines, its loveliness increases, it will never pass into nothingness, but will keep a bower quiet for us. A bower quiet for us. Children, look at these words. The world is considered to be totally traumatized and stressed. And with scorching sun, the scorching sun implying the life and its problems. But here, things of beauty create a beautiful bower for us, a quiet bower. A bower is a place where you find these shepherds and animals who come and rest, where you find mountains and springs and some trees and some natural beauty. That's called a bower. And there is quiet and peace and cool atmosphere there in the bower. It works for us like a bower works for a traveler who has been traveling in the scorching heat and has been traveling for miles. It rejuvenates our parched soul. And it also, things of beauty also give us a sleep full of sweet dreams. And of course, it gives us health and quiet breathing, unlike a life that we have in big cities where health is a far cry. And sleep, we have nightmares instead of sweet dreams. And our breathing has become a regular panting. We stop breathing but try and live in the beautiful mountains, try and live in the countryside, try and live in villages, live a life which is simpler, closer to nature, and realize how these things of beauty have strength, have the internal strength of calming our nerves, which are about to give us a nervous breakdown because life has become so stressful, so manipulative, and so hopeless that we cannot even sleep peacefully or breathe in a peaceful manner. So, if we visualize beauty in our mind in Beauty in nature could be of various forms. It could be lovely trees, lovely blossoms, beautiful and formidable mountains, lovely flowers. The Romantics, and especially William Wordsworth, speaks about pantheism. The Romantics, they talked about the healing effects of nature and that how nature worked for them. And William Wordsworth had even called nature as the nurse, guide, the soul of my mortal being. It had a healing effect. And even if we were depressed, William Wordsworth believed that if you did go and interact with nature, you would your soul would suddenly feel elated once more. So here we see beauty in nature. A thing of beauty could also be a beauty in the form of art and architecture. A beautiful painting as Mona Lisa, or a beautiful form of Roman architecture, or in our own country, if we were to look at Taj Mahal, any form of architecture, any form of art, a beautiful tapestry, a beautiful carpet, a beautiful painting, all these are things of beauty. And anything which is beautiful, anything which is appealing to our higher senses, is not something which we will ever forget. These are things of beauty which stay in a corner of our mind, and we do have the strength to replay this cassette in the times which we find most hopeless. So here we see another side of beauty, like in our country, Taj Mahal, the great monument, the great symbol of love. For generations and for centuries, Taj Mahal, the monument which was built as a symbol of love, has made millions of people happy. It is a sight which lives in the minds of people all over the world, regardless of their race, their country, and their religion. And it's a sight which has for hundreds of years given happiness to people who might be looking for things of beauty. So these are the things of beauty which remain eternally in our soul, in our consciousness, which never abate, which never diminish. A thing of beauty could be even the sight of poor little children of slum smiling. Their smile, lovely smile of the slum children. Remember the poem, an elementary school classroom in a slum. The slum children, remember, recall their smile. That is also a thing of beauty to behold. See their smiling faces despite the setbacks, despite the torturous circumstances in which they are living. Just behold their smile. That is also a thing of beauty. That is also a perennial joy, an eternal joy for us, for our soul. Their smile despite their hair, like rootless weeds, rough hair, unkempt hair. Their smile despite the inhuman condition in which they live in, despite their poverty, despite the lack of comforts, despite the lack of basic needs. There is a smile in their face. We can't but help think of this as a thing of beauty. The little underprivileged children smiling despite their despair and depravity. So a thing of beauty could also be a moment with a close friend, secrets shared, emotions shared, our thoughts understood, kind of eloquent silence that friends feel for each other, share with each other, is also something as a thing of beauty which will give us joy forever. And of course, love in any form, love in any kind, be it divine love, be it a mother's love to a child. Love is a hugely sustaining factor. Love is a factor which nourishes a soul, nourishes our stressed life. Love is something which gives us a purpose to go on. Otherwise, life the way it is in the world today is actually not worth living. The kind of killing, the kind of manipulation, the kind of heartlessness, the kind of insensitivity, the lack of compassion. The world is not a beautiful place anymore. It's a miserable, terrible place. By reading these lines, I am just recollected of a famous verse of Bhagavad Gita. Mam upetti punarjanam dukkhalayam shashwatam. Lord Krishna tells Arjuna that the world is a miserable place full of birth, death, disease, and old age. It is full of miseries. Just I am reminded of that glorious verse of the Bhagavad Gita. Anyways, so the world is not a beautiful place anymore, but sometimes in this terrible world also we see a beautiful tender side, like a mother cuddling a little child, and we feel and realize that, oh, love does exist. And it's very rightly said that the closest to altruistic love is a mother's love to her child. The purest love which exists in this world is a mother's love. Otherwise, all other loves of this world are selfish love. But the purest love in this world is the mother's love to her child. And everything else has a purpose behind it. But it's a mother who smiles when a child is happy, and she is truly altruistic. So this is the explanation of the first part of the poem. In my next video, I'll explain you the second part of the poem. Till then, please revise it. Take care. Bye.